Welcome back to Grow and Learn, everyone. This week, we are continuing the subject of leadership, the subject of changing teams, facilitating proper communication. Today, we have as a guest Marsha Acker. She's a leadership coach. She facilitates team conflicts and communication, but she's going to tell you more about it. You know, I am having a bit of a difficulty describing what she's doing exactly, but this is why we have her to find out. And she's also the author of the book, Build Your Model for Leading Change. I'm welcoming today Marsha Acker. Welcome, Marsha.
Thanks, Zorina. It's nice to be here.
So, yeah, you've been running a company called TeamCatapult for a while.
Yes.
What kind of services do you provide with this company?
We are focused, I often say we do a lot of work with leaders that are in the tech space or are really expert at their craft in science and technology, and who maybe the expertise has gotten them to where they are, but the working with other humans might be a bit of the challenge. And so we do a lot of work with leaders, executives, leadership teams, helping them to grow their leadership. And we focus a lot on kind of a core belief that we have that all of our challenges often come down to how we are communicating with one another. So what happens in that face-to-face communication when we come together? So that's our focus.
I see. So when you say facilitating behavioral change in the description of your company, does this mean mainly communication, or is there another component to behavioral change?
Well, a lot of the ways that, when we work with a team, so if a team is, I think when anybody raises their hand and says, hey, like what we've been doing, it's been working, but we've reached this point where it isn't working as well as it was. Like I think anytime any of us, whether individually or a team, reach that moment, there is a desire. I don't know that we would say, hey, I want to change my behavior, but often there is a desired place that people want to go. And I think in the process of going from point A to point B, there's behavioral change that needs to happen if we're going to make it stick. Like I think if we just want to change a process or we want to change task, that works. There's certainly some change that makes a lot of sense for it to be a process-led change. But if we're looking for something that's more sustainable, yes, I think that's where behavior change comes in. And we tend to start with communications. Like it is the place. I think if you're going to talk about behavior change, it can mean lots of different things. But in the workplace, when we are speaking and conversing and interacting with others, it's those moments that I think allow us to hone in on what does that look like, and helping individuals and teams see. We work with a bit of a technology around looking at the structure of communications, and the focus of that, it's through that process of looking at communication that brings about behavioral change, more sustainable behavioral change.
What are some major roadblocks to communication that you're seeing, and how do you help turn them around? I mean, you mentioned technology, but what are some concrete things that you do?
I think I don't know about you, but I could go all the way back in my career. So my very early days, my background was in software engineering. So I can identify a lot with, having a craft or an expertise and not really having all the many skills to interface with other humans. It's certainly part of my path. But I think and I would have said this back to you, back 20 years ago, I think one of the biggest challenges to communication is that we believe we do it really well already. And why would I need to focus on building skills in communication? Because I communicate just fine all day. We all do, all day, every day. I don't know that we tend to look at it as a craft to actually develop the skills of communicating with others. So, and it can get labeled as like a soft skill, or even though I'm not a fan of that language, I think a lot of times it gets treated that way. So I think that's one of the challenges. And then I think the other challenge is that when we're communicating with others, I think one of the biggest assumptions is that everybody sees the same thing that we see, like that you and I are looking at something and we would look at it and describe it in the same exact way. And the reality is that we don't. We'll see very different things. We'll care about different aspects of the same thing or the same situation that we're looking at. And so I think it's in those two assumptions that I've noticed become some of the biggest challenges in communication. We think we already do it well, and we think everybody sees what we see. So it tends to lead to, I think, some of the most, I call them stuck patterns or Groundhog Day conversations. So if you've ever had the experience of interfacing with someone or having a relationship with someone, and you keep having the same conversation over and over every day, I think that's a great flag for, there might be something in our communication that isn't working all that well. So I think those are two of our biggest challenges.
And when companies hire you, do they say we have a problem with communication, or what do they say?
Well, they will often say things like, hey, we need to get from, we're having a lot of change in our industry and we're noticing we're really challenged by entrenched sort of, leadership teams will often struggle with the idea that we're not acting as one team. We're acting as a marketing department and a ops department and a design department. And, some of the work at the leadership team level is to really come together and act as one team, not putting a stake in the ground for your individual area of expertise. I think the other challenge that can sometimes manifest is that teams will, ask for help, and there's a problem person on the team. We're getting along fine, but it's this particular individual that's really creating some of our challenges. Can you come help us, learn to work better? And I've yet to find a team where it truly is just that one person. Like I think of teams as systems, there will be a part that everybody's playing in that. So those are some of the reasons that people can come. I think the other type of team that we often work with are teams that are starting up. So we're getting ready to start working with a new leadership team that's part of a startup organization. And so they're just coming together, and it's a fantastic time to talk about how do we want to lead together. So a lot of times the way that we're engaging with a leadership team is helping them define their collective leadership. So what is that going to look like? What are we going to reward? And while that might be the bigger topic, we also help them look at the way in which the how that they're having those conversations. So we kind of build a communicative competency muscle for leadership teams so that they can continue to navigate whatever the topic might be ongoing.
Mm-hmm. So it seems that it's a topic much further ranging than communication. It's basically goes into all aspects of leadership, including reward systems and
Yes, and we use the structure of the communication to help leadership teams navigate it. So like everything I think that becomes a conflict or a challenge, regardless of the topic, I think what sits at it, like at the core of it is, are you and I able to engage in an effective conversation so that we can talk about that? And a lot of times the answer, like if a topic becomes heated or difficult to navigate, or we keep talking about the same thing over and over again, a lot of why that's manifesting as a challenge is it will come down to how you and I are communicating with one another. So if we can see the structure, then you and I can actually take responsibility for what part we're playing in that. And then working the structure actually lets us have a conversation about the topic. And now all of a sudden the topic isn't as big of a mountain as it was before. So it's pretty fascinating, I think, the way it works. But I have come to really believe that there isn't much of challenges that happen for us in leadership, our own leadership, or working with others in leadership that doesn't come down to a structural way to look at what's behind the challenge that we're having.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And how would you define a structure? What can you give me an example of a structure of communication? I don't really know what that means.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does. It's a little bit head scratchy, right? Like, what do you mean by structure?
Yeah.
So, there are 4 different levels to our communication, and without kind of going through all of those, the first level is likely the easiest to see, and it has to deal with the way in which we start sentences, the sentences that we say in communication. So I think it's pretty fascinating, but every sentence that we say could be coded into one of 4 actions. The first is a move. So a move sets direction in the conversation. So you just made a move and said, hey, I'm curious about structure. What would that sound like? So that's a move. The second would be a follow. I supported that. I said, yes, that's a fantastic question. I'm happy to explore that. That's a follow. It gets behind the idea.
Mm-hmm.
The third one is oppose, and oppose offers correction. It says, hey, hold on a minute, or no, I don't want to do that right now, or this might not be the best timing. I could have said to you, yeah, that's, that we might not have time to unpack that. So let's talk about this instead. That would be an oppose with a new move behind it. And then the fourth action is called a bystand, and it's a morally neutral comment. So a lot of times questions will often come from bystand, or you might bystand on yourself and say, I notice I'm feeling confused in our conversation, or I'm really enjoying where the conversation is going. It's not getting behind an idea. It's not offering a new idea. It's just truly offering a bystand. So we can say all 4 of those in the same couple of paragraphs as we're speaking. But what's fascinating about the fact that all of our conversation can be coded into one of 4 of those actions. It has to do with, how we're setting direction, like setting direction or supporting it or correcting it, is that we need actually all 4 of those to be active in a conversation in order for the conversation to be effective. And when, like, for instance, if you and I were engaging in a conversation, not a podcast conversation, but, an ongoing conversation, we'd want to make sure that all 4 of those actions were coming into our conversation when needed. And what creates those Groundhog Day conversations, those conversations that we have over and over again, is often when one or more of those actions is missing on an ongoing basis. And so in teams, there are some patterns that will emerge. So one is a team that's got a pattern of courteous compliance where there's a lot of move and follow. Mm-hmm. So someone sets direction, and there are a lot of people who will often get behind it or support it. That's helpful in some respects, but there will be other times where there's a lack of opposition coming into the conversation. So teams that have that pattern will often be lacking someone who's brave enough to push back and say, hey, I think we're going off the rails, or I really see this differently. Here's my perspective. So that can happen. Another pattern that can happen is when a team gets into making lots of moves. That's helpful for brainstorming if you're in a facilitated session and you're brainstorming new ideas, but teams that have the pattern of what's called serial moving, when they meet, will introduce a lot of different ideas, but you'll leave the meeting and you'll go, what did we decide? Like, did we actually get to any decision based on that? Or did we leave some loose ends open? And those meetings will have a lot of energy. So they kind of have this sparse belief that we accomplished a lot, but we're really, in teams like that, they're really missing someone to voice follow. So that's kind of how there are a couple of other patterns, but those are 2 of the very common patterns that can emerge in teams. And so part of it is helping a team see it and then be able to change it in the moment. So when I said to you a moment ago, if we keep having the same conversation, let's just say, there's a new product that the team wants to launch, and we keep talking about it, but we don't seem to make progress on it. Chances are one of those 4 actions is missing in our conversation. So can we slow the conversation down enough to catch sight of it? Can somebody bring in a really clear pose, or can someone bystand and name context? And when we can activate that in a whole system and everybody take part and responsibility for it, then all of a sudden there is a different kind of conversation that's emerging, like the nature of the conversation changes. And then the topic actually doesn't become that big of a deal anymore, because what's happening is everyone is coming into that conversation in a different way. So that's just a small example of a way you can look at structure as a way to navigate the outcome of the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, while you were talking, I could definitely recognize some of my experiences in meetings with different teams that I've had in my corporate job previously. So I do recognize these patterns now that you mentioned them. Yeah. Do you actually educate the people on these communication techniques, or do you sit there and communicate and facilitate a resolution to a certain problem or negative situation?
We do a little of both. So when we engage with teams, our whole objective is to help them see what we're seeing. So we do education on the structure, how to look at the structure. But we also sit alongside the team for a period of time and coach them so that they can, it's one thing to sort of catch sight, just like you just did. It's a fairly easy language to onboard and go, I can totally see that. I remember 2 weeks ago when that pattern was emerging. It can be a little bit more difficult when the stakes rise or you're really in the heat of the moment to catch sight of it. And so part of our objective is to build that competency in the team so that they're absolutely not relying on external support. But sometimes that takes a little bit of time. So we will come in typically about once a month and work with a team just to help them build that competency, set them on their way, see how it goes, and then come back in a couple of weeks. So,
what portion of the overall company culture does communication in the way that you facilitate it take? I don't know if the question is clear. It's maybe when you speak to when you work with smaller companies and startups, it doesn't matter so much. But let's say it's a larger company, like I've seen some big names that you've worked with, and they have an established company culture, right? So maybe they're very compliant as a whole, generally speaking, as a company culture. How do you break this pattern in a team?
We hope that, that large organizations for sure are different when it comes to looking at communication patterns. So a lot of times we're working with a senior leadership team and helping them onboard that. I think about, we talk a lot about the notion that leaders bring the weather. And so certainly some of the dynamics in conversation, what's welcomed and not welcomed, or tolerated and not tolerated, definitely gets set from more senior leadership teams. So a lot of times we'll start there, but then really wanting to build that muscle inside the organization. The large orgs can't necessarily do this across every team, but they can look for inflection points or critical junctures in the org where it would make sense for, if there are two departments that are, they're noticing, this happens a lot of times in some software companies where there's the engineering arm and the design arm, and they can tend to get really entrenched and have difficulty navigating that. So there can be these inflection points or junctures where it makes sense to come in because you're noticing that conversation is stuck here, or there's becoming a bottleneck in terms of how we work. And leaders would go and then work, particularly with that at that particular juncture, and help that group of people onboard some of the language and build the competency. So it's about doing it in pockets.
I see. All right, let's talk about your book. Your book is called it's behind you for the ones that are watching and not listening only to the podcast, but it's called Build Your Model for Leading Change.
Yes.
What is it about?
It's a lot about what we've just talked about. So, I think so many of us are faced, particularly in corporate organizations, we're faced with needing to lead change, tasked with it in some way. It's what you and I talked about at the very beginning about I see that I want to go here and I recognize that I'm here and I see the gap. And it can be overwhelming about how we get there. And I think there's hundreds and hundreds of books and tools and techniques, but everything for me comes down to if we're going to lead change, do we have a shared language for how to navigate some of the difficult aspects of conversations? Like, can we have the conversation that we need to have? So the first half of the book, the first 2 chapters are really about the structure of communications that you and I have just talked about. And then the second half of the book is about having a model for how you're going to lead change. So I think a lot of us could tell you what we do. Like if we're tasked with leading change, we could give you this whole list. Well, I start here and I make sure that I've got a team engaged. So we can tell you what we do. But I think very few of us can tell you why we do what we do. And it's in the why, it's in getting, as I say to you, for me and my model of change, I'm really clear about the fact that working at the intersection of where people talk and meet and have conversations, if we can build that competency, I think there isn't anything that a team can't do if they're able to talk about it well together. But that's my model. So everybody will have a different model for how they lead change. So the book is a guided workbook. It's not a weekend read, but it's a guided workbook and journal to help you get clear about what your model is. And so there's suggestions and guides and prompts for what that looks like. And I think the benefit that I have observed in leaders over the years is just being clear about the why, like what it is that I'm doing and why I'm doing it. It's not so that it can make me right in an argument or a debate with someone else, but it's so that it can make me clear. So when I think about it as like this grounded clarity or confidence when your vision of what you're getting ready to set out and lead in the organization meets the day-to-day reality of constant change, flux, lots of things emergent, that you can just be really clear about, okay, well, I can handle that because I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I think that's where clarity and confidence come from.
So is it in a way related to purpose and motivation to link to personal purpose as well?
Yeah, I think personal motivation and purpose absolutely tie into it. So the book actually lays out 3 different models that work they're very connected and intersected. So there is the first model, which is being clear about your model for behavior. And that's onboarding a language for communication. So that's your behavioral model. And then there is the model for leading change. So how does change happen? How do you believe change happens? What are the things that you would do and why would you do that? And then the third model is building your model for living. And that's my why, my purpose. What's important to me? What do I value? What do I care about? And it's the intersection of all 3 of those models. How am I leading change? Which we can be overly focused. I know I'll speak for myself. I'm passionate and driven, but I can also be overly focused on work. And sometimes my model for change and leadership can get out of balance with my model for living. And in my model for living, I value time and family and self-care. And so having clarity about both of those helps me keep them in balance.
Great. Wow, this sounds good to me. I'm very glad you touched on the personal life perspective of the whole work situation and leading change, because sometimes we get we get lost in all the professional talk and we forget that we are actually humans, and all the professional success is anyhow driven by our human needs, desires, internal drives, and so on.
Yeah. Awesome. I feel like we do get out of balance quite a bit. And it feels like the last several years of living through a pandemic helped to highlight that for some. But I think it's so important to be really clear about all 3 of those. Like, what's my behavior? what's my model for living? What's important to me? The book is based on David Cantor's theory of structural dynamics. And he's the author of the theory. But one of the things that he posed as part of the model for living is, what does it mean to live a life worth living? And I think it's a really important question for us to ask and ponder.
Where can people find your book?
It's online, so Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's also available at any indie bookstore, so your local bookstores can also purchase it.
Great. Thank you so much, Marsha. Where can people find you? What do you offer in terms of services?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of places. If you want to connect with me, you can find me at Marsha Acker on LinkedIn. Just drop me a message about how you are connecting. I'm pretty good about responding within about 24 hours. You can read more about the book at buildyourmodel.com, and you can find us at teamcatapult.com.
All right. Thank you so much.
Teamcatapult.com
is the main page for engaging you for a consultation.
Yes.
Consultations. Okay.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much,
Zorina.
Marsha. It was an insightful conversation. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Grow and Learn. We hope that you found our podcast informative, engaging, and inspiring. Our mission is to help you keep growing and learning, and we hope that our conversations and insights have provided you with practical advice and useful perspectives. If you're looking for personalized support and guidance to help you achieve your personal or professional growth objectives, I offer a range of services to help. As a trusted management partner and mentor, I work with businesses in the process of transformation, looking for new streams of business, as well as M&A. With an extensive professional network of experts and mentors, I can bring on board the right person or team based on the specific needs of the company I'm working with. To learn more about the services I offer and how I can help you achieve your goals, visit my website at grownlearn.org. You can also reach out to me via email or social media. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this episode of Grow and Learn, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us, and it helps us to continue to create content that is relevant and valuable to our listeners. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to sharing more insights and perspectives with you in the future.